What happens when one of Hollywood's most laid-back actors completely loses his cool on live television? The answer might surprise you, because what started as a routine morning show appearance turned into one of the most intense confrontations daytime TV has ever witnessed. Before we get into exactly what set Matthew McConaughey off, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us what you think really happened here. The Today Show set was buzzing with its usual morning energy when Matthew McConaughey walked out to join Willie Geist for what everyone assumed would be a lighthearted chat about his latest project. McConaughey settled into the chair across from Geist. That familiar, easy smile on his face, the kind that's made him America's favorite charming Southern gentleman for decades. But within minutes, that smile would vanish completely. Willie Geist opened with what seemed like standard fare. "Matthew, great to have you back. You've been pretty vocal lately about some controversial topics. Let's talk about your new foundation and the work you're doing." Simple enough, right? But it was the way Geist said it, that slight edge in his voice. The emphasis on the word controversial, that first hint of tension crackling through the studio. McConaughey's smile tightened just a fraction. "Well, Willie, I appreciate you having me, but I'm not sure I'd call compassion and common sense controversial. That's part of the problem right there, isn't it? We've gotten to a place where basic human decency gets labeled as taking sides." Geist leaned forward, pen tapping against his note card. "But you have to admit, some of your recent statements have divided people. You've been criticized by both sides of the political spectrum. Are you comfortable with that position?" "Comfortable." McConaughey's drawl stretched the word out. "Willie, I'm not trying to be comfortable. I'm trying to be honest. There's a difference. And yeah, when you refuse to pick a team in this country's current climate, both teams get mad at you. That's where we are." The audience shifted in their seats. This wasn't the fun, rambling McConaughey they were used to. This was someone with something to say, and you could see Willie Geist recalculating his approach in real time. "Let's talk specifics then," Geist pressed. "Last month you made comments about the entertainment industry that a lot of your colleagues found offensive. You essentially accused Hollywood of being out of touch with regular Americans. That's a pretty bold statement from someone who's made millions in that very system." McConaughey's jaw tightened. "See, this is exactly what I'm talking about. I didn't accuse anyone of anything. I made an observation based on conversations I've had with people all over this country. Real people, Willie, not people in green rooms and studio lots. And yeah, I've made money in Hollywood. I'm grateful for that. But making money somewhere doesn't mean you surrender your right to see its flaws. But don't you think there's a certain hypocrisy in that?" Geist shot back, his voice taking on a sharper edge. "You're sitting here, a major Hollywood star, on national television, criticizing the very industry that gave you this platform. You can't have it both ways." The studio got noticeably quieter. Even the crew members who usually busied themselves with cameras and lighting equipment seemed to freeze, sensing something brewing. McConaughey sat up straighter, his famous laid-back posture gone. "Hypocrisy. Let me tell you about hypocrisy, Willie. Hypocrisy is journalists who claim they want honest conversation but then attack anyone who doesn't stick to the approved script. Hypocrisy is inviting someone on your show to talk about their work and then ambushing them with gotcha questions designed to create controversy for ratings." "Now hold on," Geist interjected, his face flushing slightly. "Nobody's ambushing you. These are legitimate questions that people want answers to. You've positioned yourself as some kind of voice of reason, above the fray. But a lot of people think that's just a convenient way to avoid taking real stands on important issues." McConaughey's eyes narrowed. "A lot of people think, or you think, Willie, because it seems to me like you've decided what my motivations are before I even sat down in this chair. You want to know why I don't pick sides? It's not because I don't have convictions. It's because I actually talk to people on both sides, and you know what I've learned. Most Americans have way more in common than the media and politicians want us to believe." "That's a nice sentiment," Geist said, and there was no mistaking the condescension in his tone now. "But it's also incredibly naive. There are real issues that require real positions. Climate change, voting rights, economic inequality. You can't just sit on the fence and pretend both sides have equal merit." "Who said it?" Geist shifted in his seat, clearly not expecting McConaughey to come back that hard. But instead of backing off, he doubled down. "Okay, so you faced criticism. Welcome to public life. But that still doesn't explain why you refuse to commit to clear positions. Let me ask you directly, do you think the last election was fair?" The question hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. McConaughey stared at Geist for a long moment, and you could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. This was a trap, and they both knew it. "Are you serious right now?" McConaughey's voice was dangerously quiet. "You want me to weigh in on election integrity on a morning talk show? This is exactly the problem, Willie. Everything has to be a loyalty test. Everything has to be a gotcha moment. You don't actually care what I think about election security or voter access or any of the nuanced issues around that topic. You want a soundbite you can use to put me in a box. It's a simple question. Matthew, yes or no? Was the election fair? Nothing about that question is simple, and you know it. McConaughey's frustration was boiling over now. Was there fraud that changed the outcome? No. Should we have better election security measures? Probably. Should more people have easier access to voting? Also, probably. See, Willie, reality is complicated, but you want me to give you a binary answer, so you can either celebrate me or destroy me depending on which side I pick. Geist leaned back, a slight smirk on his face. So you're saying you can't give a straight answer? I'm saying I won't play your game. McConaughey's voice rose again. I'm saying that what you call a straight answer is actually just picking which half of the country you want to alienate, and I'm tired of pretending that's the same thing as honesty. The host shuffled his papers, regrouping. Let's move on then. You've been very vocal about what you call the breakdown of civil discourse in America, but some would argue that civil discourse is a privilege, that when people are fighting for their basic rights, civility goes out the window. What do you say to those people? McConaughey rubbed his face, and for a second you could see how exhausted he was by this entire conversation. I'd say they're right to be passionate about their rights. I'd say anger is justified, in a lot of cases, but I'd also say that rage without strategy is just noise. You want to change things? You need to bring people along. You need to persuade, not just perform. Easy for you to say, Geist shot back. You're a wealthy white man. Your rights aren't under attack. The accusation landed like a slap. McConaughey's face went hard. You don't know the first thing about my life, Willie. You don't know what I've seen, what I've experienced, who I've loved, what I've fought for. And that right there, that assumption you just made, that's the poison killing this country. You just made a judgment about me based on my skin color and my bank account. You just reduced me to a category. And then you wonder why we can't have honest conversations. I'm making an observation based on observable reality, Geist defended. You have privilege. That's not an attack. It's a fact. And what about your privilege, Willie? McConaughey stood up again, his voice cutting. You sit here in this studio, making millions, asking gotcha questions, stirring up conflict, and then you go home feeling morally superior because you asked the tough questions. But you're not solving anything. You're not building anything. You're just keeping the anger machine running because that's what keeps people watching. Geist's voice got sharp. I'm doing my job. I'm holding public figures accountable. Accountable. McConaughey laughed, but there was no humor in it. You're not holding anyone accountable. You're performing accountability. There's a difference. Real accountability requires good faith. It requires actually listening to answers instead of just waiting for your next gotcha. It requires giving people room to think out loud, to be complicated, to evolve. So what you're saying is I should just lob you softball questions and let you ramble about unity and love. The sarcasm in Geist's voice was thick now. I'm saying you should be a journalist instead of a prosecutor. I'm saying you should be curious instead of combative. I'm saying maybe, just maybe, we'd all be better off if these conversations were about understanding instead of winning. Willie Geist set down his notes and looked directly at McConaughey. You know what I think is really going on here, Matthew? I think you're uncomfortable because someone is actually challenging you instead of just nodding along while you give your enlightened centrist routine. You're used to being the coolest guy in the room, the one everyone agrees with because you never actually say anything that might offend anyone. McConaughey took a step closer to the desk. You want to know what makes me uncomfortable, Willie? What makes me uncomfortable is watching someone with a platform like yours use it to divide instead of illuminate. What makes me uncomfortable is seeing journalists become activists, and activists become journalists, and nobody seems to care about the truth anymore. Geist stood up now too, matching McConaughey's energy. You want to talk about the media? Fine, let's talk about it. You come on shows like this. You use our platform to promote your projects, to sell your books, to build your brand, and then you turn around and criticize us for doing our jobs. You can't have it both ways. Matthew, I'm not trying to have it both ways. McConaughey fired back. I'm trying to have an actual conversation. But you're not interested in conversation. You're interested in confrontation. You came into this interview with an agenda, and when I didn't play along, you got hostile. I got hostile. Geist's voice rose. You're the one who started lecturing me about journalism. You're the one who accused me of performing. I asked you legitimate questions that millions of Americans want answered, and you've spent the last 15 minutes dodging them. I haven't dodged anything. I've tried to give you thoughtful, nuanced answers to complicated questions. But nuance doesn't work for you because it doesn't fit into your format. You need villains and heroes. You need clear good guys and bad guys. The idea that someone might see value in multiple perspectives terrifies you because it threatens your entire worldview. Geist's face was flushed now. My worldview? You don't know anything about my worldview. You know what I think, Matthew? I think you've convinced yourself that you're better than everyone else because you won't take sides. But really, you're just scared. You're scared of losing fans, scared of losing opportunities, scared of being canceled. So you hide behind this philosopher act and pretend it's wisdom. The words hit McConaughey like a physical blow. For a moment, he didn't respond, just stood there absorbing what Geist had said. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower but somehow more intense than before. You think I'm scared? Let me tell you what scares me, Willie. What scares me is a country so divided that we can't even agree on basic facts anymore. What scares me is people being pushed further and further into their corners, with no one willing to reach across and find common ground. What scares me is watching friendships end, families split apart, communities destroyed, all because we've been convinced that anyone who disagrees with us is evil. That's what scares me. Not losing fans or opportunities. Losing the country I love to tribalism and hatred and self-righteousness on both sides. So yeah, I refuse to pick a team. I refuse to simplify complex issues into sound bites. I refuse to participate in the destruction of American discourse just to make people like you happy. Geist shook his head. You're living in a fantasy world, Matthew. There isn't some silent majority of reasonable people in the middle waiting to be inspired by your message of unity. There are people fighting for their rights and people trying to take those rights away. There are aggressors and victims. And by refusing to pick a side, you're helping the aggressors. That's bull, and you know it. McConaughey's voice cracked with emotion. That's the exact binary thinking that's destroying us. Not every issue has a clear aggressor and victim. Not every conflict has a good side and an evil side. Life is messy, Willie. People are complicated. And the sooner we accept that, the sooner we can start actually solving problems instead of just scoring points. Give me one example, Geist challenged. One issue where both sides have legitimate points. McConaughey didn't hesitate. Immigration. You've got people who genuinely want to help refugees and immigrants because they see it as a moral imperative. And you've got people who are genuinely worried about border security and the strain on social services. Both concerns are valid. Both come from real places. But instead of finding solutions that address both concerns, we demonize each other. So what's your solution? Geist pressed. I don't have all the solutions, Willie. Nobody does. That's the point. We need to work together to find them. But we can't do that when half the country thinks the other half is evil. We can't do that when journalists like you treat every conversation as a battle to be won instead of an opportunity to understand. Geist's jaw clenched. You keep coming back to attacking me, attacking journalism. Maybe that's the real issue here. Maybe you can't handle being questioned. Maybe you're so used to people treating you like a movie star that you've forgotten what it's like to have your ideas challenged. Challenge my ideas all you want, McConaughey shot back. But that's not what you're doing. You're attacking my character. You're questioning my motives. You're trying to paint me as a coward or a fraud instead of engaging with what I'm actually saying. And that's not journalism, Willie. That's character assassination. The studio audience was completely silent now, transfixed by what was unfolding. Some looked uncomfortable, others fascinated, but no one could look away. Geist took a breath, seeming to collect himself. Okay, let me ask you this then. If you're so committed to bridging divides and finding common ground, what have you actually accomplished? What has all this philosophical talk actually changed? McConaughey's expression shifted. For the first time, there was something like vulnerability in his eyes. You want to know what I've accomplished? I've had conversations with people who'd never talked to someone with different views before. I've seen the accusation hung in the air between them. Willie Geist's face went from red to nearly purple. You think I'm performing? You're literally an actor, Matthew. Your entire career is performance. And now you're performing this role of the wise sage who's above it all. And frankly, it's insulting to everyone who's actually on the ground fighting for change. McConaughey stepped even closer to the desk, his voice dropping to something almost dangerous. You want to talk about people on the ground? I just spent 3 weeks in communities that you and your colleagues wouldn't set foot in. Communities that have been forgotten by both political parties. People who are struggling to put food on the table, who've lost faith in every institution, who feel invisible. And you know what they told me? They're sick of people like you telling them who they should hate. That's a nice story, Geist said, his voice dripping with skepticism. Very heartwarming, but it doesn't change the fact that you're essentially advocating for the status quo by refusing to support real change. Real change. McConaughey's laugh was sharp and bitter. You think real change comes from cable news talking points. You think it comes from Twitter feuds and viral take. Real change comes from the ground up, Willie. It comes from people reconnecting with their humanity. It comes from rebuilding trust. And you can't rebuild trust by treating everyone who disagrees with you as an enemy. Geist grabbed his notes, shuffling them aggressively. Let me read you something. This is from a tweet you posted last year. You said, and I quote, "We need to find a way forward together." But together with who, Matthew? Together with people who want to strip away voting rights. Together with people who deny climate science. Together with people who spread conspiracy theories. At what point does your desire for unity become complicity? McConaughey's eyes blazed. Don't you dare question my moral compass. Don't you dare suggest that trying to understand people makes me complicit in anything. I've fought for causes you probably don't even know about. I've put my money where my mouth is. I've used my platform to amplify voices that need to be heard. But I've done it without demonizing half the country. And apparently that makes me the bad guy in your book. It makes you naive, Geist countered. It makes you someone who doesn't understand that we're in a fight for the soul of this country. and neutrality is not an option. I'm not neutral, McConaughey's voice rose to nearly a shout. I have strong beliefs, I have deep convictions, but I also have enough humility to know I don't have all the answers. I have enough wisdom to know that the people I disagree with aren't monsters. They're human beings with their own experiences and fears and hopes. And if we can't figure out how to see each other's humanity, then we're finished as a country. Spoken like someone who doesn't have anything real at stake, Geist said coldly. That was it. That was the line that finally broke something in McConaughey. His whole body tensed, and when he spoke, his voice shook with barely controlled fury. Nothing at stake. My kids are growing up in this country, Willie. I have friends and family members who've stopped speaking to each other over politics. I've watched communities I love tear themselves apart. I've gotten death threats from both sides. I've had people I respected turn their backs on me because I wouldn't join their tribe. So don't you tell me I have nothing at stake. And yet, here you are, still playing both sides. Geist wouldn't let it go. I'm not playing anything. McConaughey's voice was raw now. I'm trying to save something. I'm trying to preserve the idea that we can disagree without destroying each other. I'm trying to hold on to the belief that this country is worth fighting for. All of it, not just my side. And people like you are making that impossible. People like me. Geist stood taller. People who ask hard questions. People who don't just accept your word as gospel. People who demand accountability from public figures. People who weaponize their platforms, McConaughey said, and there was something almost pleading in his voice now. People who turn every conversation into a war. People who measure success by how much division they create instead of how much understanding they foster. Willie, don't you see what you're doing? You're not informing people. You're enraging them. You're not building bridges. You're burning them down. Geist sat back down slowly, and for just a moment, something flickered across his face. Doubt, maybe, or exhaustion, or recognition. But it vanished quickly, replaced by professional distance. I think we've covered a lot of ground here today, Geist said, his voice carefully controlled now. Matthew McConaughey, thank you for joining us. But McConaughey didn't move. He stood there, still staring at Geist, breathing hard. That's it. You're just going to end it like that. After everything we just talked about, you're going to wrap it up with a polite thank you and move on to the next segment like nothing happened. What do you want me to say, Matthew? Geist asked, and now he sounded tired too. I want you to acknowledge what just happened here, McConaughey said. I want you to admit that maybe, just maybe, the way we're having these conversations isn't working. I want you to